Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 Marianne and Richard Cavicchi Christian Education Seminar. My name is Reverend Daniel Bogri, and I am the senior pastor here at Rocky River United Methodist Church. I get to serve alongside Pastor Paul Bennett, whom you'll get to meet in just a little bit. But we welcome today Professor Mark Chubb from Case Western Reserve University as we get ready to deal with a really interesting topic called I Want to Understand You, and what a perfect topic for the world that we live in right now. And as I got to know Professor Chubb in some of the lead-in meetings, he talked about how important a person's story is. And I thought how poignant that is, because at Rocky River United Methodist Church, we say it's all about the story. We exist to help people meet Jesus Christ in the midst of their story. We believe that you don't have to have your story put together. You don't have to have it perfectly polished. It can be a broken, messed up, hurting story, or it can be a story full of joy and celebration. But we want everyone to know that Christ is already in it, maybe even before they realize it. And that's why we say our goal is to do everything in our church, all our ministries, everything we do to help people meet Christ in the midst of their story. And wait till you see the way that it piggybacks and dovetails into what Professor Chupp is going to talk about. We're so excited to have you here today. It's going to be a really fantastic presentation, a lot of opportunities to interact. And again, just thank you so much for being here on behalf of myself and Elizabeth Cavicchi and the whole family in Rocky River United Methodist Church. Welcome.
In this seminar, Professor Chupp provides framing for dialogue and for our icebreaker, Browns versus Steelers. Illustrious football fans, Reverend Dan and Pastor Paul express lively and deeply held respect and difference. Then, in facilitated breakout rooms, you do the icebreaker. Next, Professor Chupp describes Part 2, dialogue framing. Then from Westlake Public Schools, we'll hear from Superintendent Dr. Scott Coggin and Teacher Union Leader Amy Butcher. Back in your same facilitated breakout rooms, you will engage around your own stories. In the main room, after that, Professor Chupp debriefs. After the formal end, everyone is welcome to continue on Zoom for more discussion. The presentation part of today's program is recorded, not the breakout rooms. Later, the recording will be posted at the link where you registered. The idea for annual seminars at Rocky River United Methodist Church originated with my parents, who were married there, raised their family there, led and participated in the community, and attended together the first seminar in 2014. Dad was an athlete, an aeronautical engineer at NASA Glenn for over 60 years. My mother served this church as Director of Christian Education. She studied political science at Case Western Reserve University, wrote on the Equal Rights Amendment, taught political science at John Carroll and Cleveland State, and led adult Bible studies and other studies at this church. Marianne and Richard committed to the spirit of today's seminar for building understanding through dialogue. And our two examples carry on their life pursuits in sports and public education. Football was of tremendous family interest, where Richard played football from high school into his senior years. And Mom and Dad were on opposite sides of the Harvard-Yale football rivalry through graduating from those schools. Through passion for public education, Marianne served on Rocky River's school board under President Norman Case, whose memorial the Rocky River United Methodist Church is holding in a week. Mutual relations between teacher unions and administration are key to vibrant schools. Everywhere, people are polarized. Our differences divide us into compartments seemingly impervious to exchange. Instead, this seminar creates a supportive environment where our differences are openings to listen, develop respect, become curious for perspectives other than our own, build mutual understanding. After seeing dialogue demonstrated in the main Zoom room, you will engage in dialogue in breakout rooms with a facilitator. you will experience how differences enable and strengthen community. This seminar, open to the community, encourages growth in United Methodism, dialogue among different perspectives, finding ways to be in community, challenging us to lifelong education with open heart and mind. The seminar presents the church library with books on dialogue. Books will be in the church library on the Detroit Road level. The book list will come to everyone in follow-up email. I'm thankful to many for creating this seminar. Our presenter, Professor Chupp, collaboratively developed the program in many meetings. Respectful dialogue is exemplified by Rocky River United Methodist Church pastors, Reverend Dan Bougry, Pastor Paul Bennett, and from Westlake Public Schools by Dr. Scott Coggin, Amy Butcher. Supporting the program are my parents, my brothers Dick with Gretchen, Tom with Stephanie, my nieces Violet with Ruben, Elise, Julia Holly, and my husband Alva. I'm happy to thank our planning committee, Diane Dicken, Don Jones, Dave Sagasser, Twyla Sales, Isam Zaim. We thank Rocky River United Methodist Church, the pastors, Jeff Pelia, Kristen Knock, Rebecca Riddlebaugh, Sherry Schwartz, Stephen Young. Professor Chubb's assistant at CASE, JP Gralty, is our amazing Zoom coordinator. CASE students, Hannah Gill, Sami Hauserman, Jessica Mughal, and Kathleen McDonald of the network facilitate your dialogue. Additional facilitators may include Diane Dicken, Don Jones, Fiona McDonald, Dave Sagasser, Twyla Sales. Thanks to all of you for attending, reflecting, and learning together. And now I welcome Isam to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm very grateful for allowing me to be a part of your great educational programs for the past years. And I want to thank you and thank the Cavicchi family for doing this. I want to also thank all the people who are participating today in today's program. I have the honor to introduce Dr. Chubb. Dr. Chubb is a PhD who is associated professor at the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel School at the Applied Social Sciences of Case Western Reserve University, where he chairs the concentrations of community practice for social change in the Masters of Social Work programs. He's also the founding director of the Community Innovation Network, a resource for communities and practitioners seeking to transform the relationship between institutions and everyday people. His applied scholarship has focused on building community across differences, authentic community engagement, peaceful building, and conflict transformation. In 2020, Mark was named the co-directors of the Social Justice Institution at Case Western Reserve University. Dr. Chubb began his career in restorative justice, directing the first victim offender reconciliation program in the United States. He has also published numerous theory and practice-oriented articles, manuals, and book chapters. Mark is a member of the faculty of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute based at DePaul University. Dr. Chubb is an international consultant and a trainer in conflict transformation and peace building. Mark holds a PhD in social welfare from Case Western Reserve University. He received a master in social work from the University of Michigan and has a BA from Goshen College. And I want to also thank him so much. I got the chance to meet Dr. Chubb years back when he facilitated a group between Jews and Muslims years back, and I never forgot it. So when we thought about this program, I thought he's the right person for it. Dr. Chubb, we're pleased to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Isam. And as a Christian, I felt very privileged to be a part of that dialogue process, and it was really quite moving. So thank you. Thank you also to the Rocky River United Methodist Church and the Cavicchi family and the planning committee for hosting these needed forums over the years. And I want to thank JP Gralty, who is from the Community Innovation Network, as Elizabeth said, and he's our Zoom producer today, and he's done this an amazing job. So thank you, JP. I know you'll be working harder than anyone else here today to make sure everything goes smoothly. So if you have a question, he is probably going to be the person that answers it. And last fall, the planning committee began talking about the focus of this year's forum. And we said we need to know how to have a conversation with someone different from ourselves. How do we talk across differences and really listen? This difficult question is our focus today. Today's session is entitled, I Want to Understand You. Understanding starts with creating space for people to express themselves, to disagree, and to acknowledge their differences. Disagreeing does not equate with disrespecting or disregarding the other. And we are fortunate today to have two people who will work closely together, volunteer to share their own strongest disagreements. And so I want to invite Reverend Dan and Pastor Paul to enter into a conversation for us in a bit of a lively conversation that you will then use as an icebreaker in small groups.
Thank you, Professor Chupp, and welcome, Paul. It's funny, it started when Paul came here back in, I think, 2013, when I first interviewed him about coming to Rocky River United Methodist Church. Somehow it came out that he was a Pittsburgh fan, and I almost wanted to say right there, sorry, we don't want you. We found out quickly that I was a Browns fan and that he was a Steelers fan, so I wanted to remind him early on that the Browns are the best team, and that if we need be, I could do a laying on of hands of Pastor Paul and cast those demons out. So we've had some lively banter about, look what he's doing there. See what he's got? He's got a little Pittsburgh gnome. So I want to make sure mine's here too, so we're properly represented as we go into this. But, you know, Browns have such a history of being a blue collar town, and they just put everything on the field. They've had so much history and incredible players, a lot of Hall of Fame players that have carried us through the years. And as you all know that, and you'll all agree that the Browns are the best team by far. You know, Paul, I know you agree, so I'll let you let me know how you feel about that too.
Well, the only thing I can agree with you there is that we disagree, because there's really no solid argument to be made that would make the Browns appear the better team. If you want to talk towns, Pittsburgh and Cleveland are essentially identical, the same type of fan base, the same culture. So, you know, we're just as hardworking and gritty as any Cleveland team.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Wait, you said we. I forget. Where were you born?
Yeah, so I was born, you know, just an hour and a half west of Pittsburgh or so.
Okay, I forgot. How many years did you live in Pittsburgh? I forgot. I don't remember.
Pittsburgh. No, you see, I haven't actually lived there, but it's funny.
Okay. See, I was born in Cleveland. I lived in Cleveland. Yeah, my grandfather came from Hungary in 1907, settled in Cleveland, and then as my father grew up in Cleveland, became a Browns fan. Then I became a Browns fan. Now my boys are Browns. So it's family. I was born here. So so you didn't live in Pittsburgh? No,
I feel like all you're really proving is your naivety to you know, be able to understand that which surrounds you and not look beyond that. I feel like, you know, sometimes we get so caught up in the things right in front of us. Our job is to represent and to care about things beyond that. We get so prideful. If you know the word ethnocentrism, you know, we see the world through, I know I'd boggle your mind with that one. See the world through the things that are immediately around us and our identifiers. And you know, I know as a Clevelander, that's your glasses, your framework. That's how you see everything. But I think it's our job.
Well, it's because I'm a Clevelander that makes us. We've been through so much as a city, right? We earned it. We earned these the moniker, you know, that we have of being just a tough city with the rivers catching on fire back in '69 and the city going bankrupt in 1976. I mean, we've been through so much that we are just, that's what we're all about. We know how to survive no matter what.
Tougher than a city that's built on the steel industry.
So we're the Browns
defense
Cleveland's on the steel industry too.
the steel curtain defense. Our defense even has a nickname of its own, and not to mention we have players in the Hall of Fame with nicknames like the Bus and the Jaw, right? And we got a guy who does.
We got the Toe.
Can you argue that?
We got the Toe, Lou the Toe Groza. We got all kinds of wonderful nicknames too. And I don't know if you know it, but back, when Otto Graham, he went to 10 straight championships and won 7 of them. But the problem is people don't think it counts because it was before the Super Bowl era. So it's like the football didn't even exist before the Super Bowl era, but it did. And we went to 10 straight championships and won 7 of them, 7 championships.
Yeah, people don't think it counts because it was before the era where they wore helmets or, like they had like wads of leather that they were flinging. It wasn't even the same game. There was probably like 6 teams in the league, so you had to beat out, 5 of them.
Right.
That
It's
means
when the real men played. Now they have pads and helmets. Back then, they were just slamming into each other. It's when it was all about muscle and grit and champion and dirt, and you came up bloody and you earned your championship. It's just
All
different.
right.
Yeah,
Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, Paul, what's your finish?
6. We earned our championships, all 6 of them, 6 Super Bowl. How many do you have?
And that's where our argument always ends. He holds up 6, and I know I've got nothing to come back at. You win again, Paul. You win again.
Okay. Well, thank you, Reverend Dan and Pastor Paul, for modeling how to disagree mostly respectfully with one another. This was a good example of banter and debate that happens every day amongst friends and coworkers, often on a Monday morning in this country. So let's look at the differences between discussion, debate, and dialogue. I'm going to share my screen and let's see if you can fairly quickly identify what this was. So we see here on the slide, there's a difference between discussion on the left. I can't see here. Sorry about that. Discussion in the left, debate in the center, and dialogue on the right. And this was more of a debate. It was quite competitive. And they were, the goal of debate is really to try to persuade the other. And when you're listening in debate, you're looking for weaknesses, which we saw them doing in each other's arguments, and planning a counter to that. So it actually focuses on the conflict and is less focused on saving the relationship and finding common ground. And it's really about winning and the other person losing. We're going to focus on dialogue today, which is really a different approach, which is listening to understand and looking for shared meaning. Maybe it is an agreement, but it's acknowledging and understanding each other. So to be clear, there's a place for debate. In fact, I would contend that there is actually an absence of both respectful debate and dialogue happening in this country today. What we're experiencing did not occur overnight. The polarization that we see today is the result of many factors over many years. And when differences evolve into polarization, as we are experiencing, people sort themselves into like-minded groups with those who share common beliefs and values, and they cut themselves off from those who don't share those views. Compromise or negotiation are replaced with a win-lose mentality. And so I think that's what we are experiencing today. And we'll get into dialogue in a little bit, but I just want to say a little more about the context. Unfortunately, this polarization and the conflict that we're experiencing feeds narratives that creates a victim mentality on both sides. And I'm not talking about the Browns and Steelers. I'm talking about the many other places where we have very serious divides in this country around politics, around race, around other forms of identity, economics. And large groups of people in urban, rural, and suburban communities feel marginalized and left out, either economically, socially, or politically. And at an even deeper level, people feel their identity is threatened, and so that they close ranks around a set of core beliefs and values. They ignore the differences that exist between members of their same tribe and vehemently believe that they are right and the other side is wrong. And in politics in this country, this has gone to another level where both sides believe that the other threatens their identity, but also is a threat to democracy itself. Continuing in this path of polarization will not end well. We must build a bridge back toward one another. And we know that bridges are built by starting at each side and working toward connecting in the middle. We need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves if this is who we really want to be as individuals and a society, the way we are treating each other today. We can't actually change the other, even though we steadfastly believe that they are wrong. We do have the opportunity to change our own attitudes and behaviors. So it starts with me. How can I become a bridge builder? There are groups across the country working at building bridges, many focusing on dialogue. But before we leave debate, I want to lift up Braver Angels, which is a national organization with chapters across the country and in Northeast Ohio. Braver Angels is organized by those who identify as red or Republican and blue or Democrat. So these very diverse participants come together and organize debates. And one of their tools is parliamentary debate. They follow very strict debate rules and strong facilitation as a collaborative search for truth. So criticism or judgments toward an individual speaker is not allowed at all. And it's actually a very healthy debate in search of truth, as they say. But today we're not focusing on debate, we're focusing on dialogue. And the primary goal, as the handout showed, the PowerPoint slide showed, the primary goal of dialogue is to reach mutual understanding. I see you, I acknowledge you, and I understand where you're coming from. And while some common ground often emerges from dialogue, agreement is actually not necessary. Understanding each other and where the other is coming from and their underlying values and motivations is the essential goal. In order to ensure that dialogue is constructive, we need structure and ground rules that everyone commits to follow. So today you're going to practice the dialogue process. And so we invite you to commit to the agreements created, in this case, by Living Room Conversations, another national organization with chapters across the country. Their goal is to heal society by connecting people across divides, such as politics and race. Through guided conversations, participants experience a sense of respect, understanding, and even friendship in unexpected places. So I want to share with you our agreements for today. And these come from the Living Room Conversations, and they will be in your host will have these, your facilitator will have these as well. And so we will, you'll spend more time in your breakout groups on these. Be curious and listen to understand. Show respect and suspend judgment. So if you find yourself coming up with judgment, step back and say, become curious. Note any common ground as well as any differences. Be authentic and welcome others being authentic as well. Be purposeful and to the point, and own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of conversation that you want to have. The other one that I want to add to this, which is always important, is confidentiality. So confidentiality is really about sharing what you learned and what you took away, but not individuals' names or their stories. So there was a teach-in we held yesterday at the Social Justice Institute with IRTF, and they had another ground rule I thought was really interesting. Listen harder when you disagree. Challenge yourself to abandon judgment and look for new insights. So I thought that was nice wording. So before we go into the breakouts, I want to ask Sammy Hauserman, one of our case students, to introduce herself using the same prompts you'll have in your group host. And I'll put these in the chat right now so you all have them. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sammy. And the questions are what community you're from, your name, and whether you're a Browns or Steeler fan or something else. And what is one hope you have for your time together today? Sammy, you're on.
All right. My name is Sammy Hauserman. I am working with Mark at the Community Innovation Network. I'm a student at Case, and I am actually a Colts fan, but since moving to Cleveland a year and a half ago, I have become a bit of a Browns fan, I have to say. And one hope that I have for our time together today is to be able to have productive dialogue and reach a place of mutual understanding with each other.
Thank you, Sammy, for modeling how to introduce yourself in about 30 seconds. So we have a full program today, and there's going to be quite a few people in your breakout room. So it's important that we all stay disciplined throughout each of these rounds today, but we want to get every voice in the room, and we want to get through the entire program. So JP, do you have any instructions before sending people into breakouts? Your facilitator will make themselves known when they get in.
You will just automatically be moved into breakout rooms, and you will automatically be moved back when the time is up. So I'm
Okay.
going to give you that time now, and off you go.
Thank you all for participating in this first breakout. Now let's talk a little bit more about dialogue and the specific process we're going to use today. You're going to go back to that same breakout, so you will connect with those folks again. So what is dialogue? Hal Saunders, who was instrumental as a member of the Carter administration in designing the process that led up to the Camp David's Accords, defined dialogue as a process of genuine interaction through which human beings listen to each other deeply enough to be changed by what they learn. Each makes a serious effort to take the other's concerns into their own picture, even when disagreement persists. No participant gives up their identity, but each recognizes enough of the other's valid human claims so that they will act differently toward each other. I think that's a very powerful definition, and we will actually share these definitions and resources with you when we're done. So dialogue actually aims to build relationships to address a common concern. It can be a public gathering, a planned one-time session, a repeated process for a cohort of people with diverse views, or a more structured process such as sustained dialogue that takes a group through 5 stages over at least 5 sessions. We need more spaces for engaging those others who hold views different from our own. Dialogue is essentially an educational process where we learn more about the issues, ourselves and the other, and we learn more about society as a whole. These spaces for dialogue already exist. Clint Smith, in his recent book, How the Word is Passed, describes a fascinating, evolving dialogue taking place about Thomas Jefferson and his descendants. As a result of the oral history work with the descendants of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, new narratives are being explored at Monticello, Jefferson's plantation in Virginia. There's now a Sally Hemings exhibit at Monticello, and what was originally called the Garden Tour is now called the Slavery at Monticello Tour, that details the life of those who were enslaved. I've taken groups there a number of times over the last 20 years and have found the guides able to facilitate a group of strangers in one of the most honest and helpful dialogues about slavery in our nation's founding. Dialogue can be this kind of educational program. And as one of the guides told Clint Smith, we're not changing history, we're telling the full story, more of the story of everyone who lived here, not just certain people who were able to tell their story. In another example of dialogue, also from Virginia, David Camp and Lisa Shirk facilitated an interracial dialogue in Richmond, Virginia as part of the Hope in the Cities project. They used a retreat form of dialogue that focused on listening for understanding with an intention to learn. They found that this work can't be done in a 1 or 2 hour session. It requires an open-ended, more of a retreat setting where honesty and humility are paramount. It's a recognition that we don't own the truth. And for those of you who received an email before this session, if you watch the video purple, you'll see another retreat format by resetting the table that includes breaking bread in an open, natural environment. I will say dialogue can be unproductive or even harmful if each side dismisses information from the other side and will not trust anything said by the other. In fact, I was recently asked to facilitate a dialogue between public leaders who were in conflict with one another. And after talking with both sides several times, I determined that the necessary preconditions for dialogue were not yet met. So I postponed the process. And sometimes we have to wait for the moment when both sides are ready and able to be constructive. It's not simply a matter of putting people in a room. It's creating the conditions for that. We must find new ways to engage difference. If those who are on the opposite end of this divide feel truly accepted by us, it opens the door for this authentic engagement. Once fear of judgment and rejection are gone, we can begin to better understand where each is coming from, what the deepest fears are, and what values they hold dearest to them. So connecting to the other's passion and pain and our own passion and pain creates that bridge to a future where coexistence and cooperation for a greater good are more possible. So the method we're using today is reflective structured dialogue, and it's a process developed by Essential Partners, one of the oldest dialogue groups in the country, formerly known as the Public Conversations Project. And it focuses on a process for the most divisive issues in our country. The ground rules are even more regulating than the ones we're using today in a true reflective structured dialogue process. But this kind of reflective structured dialogue is taking place on the most divisive topics in the country. In fact, it's even been used to foster dialogue between KKK members and African Americans. But let me be quick to say that we do not assume for a minute that people should endure hate or hate speech in a dialogue. The structure of reflective structured dialogue and the facilitators build in safeguards, and people only enter into that who are willing to commit to respect one another. So as we prepare for our own breakout sessions, I want to introduce two members of our community, a greater Cleveland community, who are willing to be a part of this and demonstrate some of their interactions with each other. So we purposely chose the topic of union and management in education for several reasons. It's a relevant topic, and yet it's not one that is so explosive that we cannot effectively dialogue about it in one session. And whether we know it or not, many of us were taught by teachers who were part of a union. So we all have some firsthand experience maybe with that. We also have two really respected leaders from the same school district who offered to share their stories to kick off our own reflective structured dialogue on the topic. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Scott Coggin and Amy Butcher as part of this process. Scott is an experienced educator and administrator with 30 years of experience in public school education, building programs and developing organizational change that led to long-term success. He's currently a superintendent of Westlake City School District. Prior to that, he was at Midview Local School District for 14 years. He started his career with the Lakewood City Schools, where he taught students with emotional disorders when they worked as a job training, coordinator. Scott lives in Westlake with his wife and two children. His wife, Michelle, is also in education, who provides career assessments primarily to students with disability. Their daughter is at Ohio University studying to become a teacher, and their son is a senior at Westlake High, who will be studying cybersecurity at the University of Cincinnati next year. Amy Butcher has been an interventionist specialist for the Westlake City Schools for 24 years. She has a bachelor's degree in elementary and developmentally handicapped education and master's degree in computer information systems and curriculum and instruction technology. She's a member of the Westlake Teachers Association and the National Education Association. Amy also sits on the board of directors for the Northeast Ohio Education Association and the Ohio Education Association. She engages in countless activities in her region and across the state to advocate for public education students and professionals. Amy grew up in Lakewood and attended Lakewood City Schools, and she currently resides in Cleveland Heights with her longtime partner, Dean, and their 3 cats. So I invite us to listen to each of them as they share their stories and perspectives. And as you listen to Scott and Amy, I invite you to suspend judgment yourselves, listen to their stories, what experiences they bring, what the needs and values are that have shaped their views, so that you can truly understand and appreciate where each of them is coming from before you enter into your own dialogue. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott and to Amy.
So we discussed that I would start off. So you think typically of union activism and you think of union thugs. That was most definitely not my first experience with the union. Back in the 1970s, when I was a young elementary student, Lakewood Teachers Association went on strike. And my first experience with unionism was my mom and I in the kitchen, baking cupcakes and cookies and making big vats of hot chocolate and coffee and putting them in our little red wagon and dragging them up to the picket line to give them to the teachers who were my teachers. And then as I progressed, so that was my very first experience with the union. As that progressed, I got a job. I worked in a grocery store and it was a union store. So I had to join the retail employees union. Didn't have much experience with that other than I knew I was a union member. And then I got my teaching license and was hired in Westlake. And Westlake had a very strong union. And I first was a building rep in that union and thought, wow, this is really neat. This is where the decisions are being made. This is how we are helping our students have better public education experiences by making sure that their teachers get what they need. And then after that, I thought, I want to be in charge. I want to help. I want to help make these decisions. So I became the secretary of the Westlake Teachers Association. And then an opening came up on the executive board and I became the president of the Westlake Teachers Association. And that was during quite a tumultuous time that we're going to talk about next, leading up to a strike. I also have a cat who's very interested in everything that happens on the computer. While that was happening, positions came up in Northeastern Ohio. Our regions are organized by, our unions are organized by region in Ohio. So we have Northeastern Ohio, Southwestern Ohio, Central Ohio. And I ran and was elected to serve on the board of directors for the Northeastern Ohio Education Association. And that was great because then I was influencing regional policy to make schools better, to advocate at the state level and the regional level, talking to our lawmakers, House of Representatives, senators about what would make education better. And then I moved up wanting to be able to affect more change and make schools even better for our students and our educators. And ran for the board of directors for Ohio Education Association. So that meant that I was working across Ohio to advocate for public school teachers. And also, we also have in our union bus drivers, cooks, aides, secretaries, to make their working conditions better and to make our conditions for students better. So that's how I got my start in unionism.
Thank you. And Amy, I hope you're okay and you're not getting attacked by cats. I saw a tail flying at one point in time.
Every time I start talking, he thinks I'm talking to him.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Chupp mentioned, my name is Scott Coggin. I'm the superintendent of the Westlake City Schools. My story started in regard to education when I was in college. I actually started off as an accounting major. Thought I was going to become an accountant. However, I started volunteering with the Special Olympics and then found that I really enjoyed working with people with disabilities, then made a shift to education. I became an intervention specialist working with students with disabilities, specifically students with behavior disorders. As I did that, I found that I enjoyed the work that I was doing, but in reading some studies, finding that the population who I worked with, and that's the students with behavior disorders, after 4 years of leaving high school, had the highest unemployment rate and a lack of success rate. So I was really concerned about what happened later with our students. So I took a job as a job training coordinator. Then as I became a job training coordinator, it took me out of the classroom and it gave me a wider view of what was going on in schools. And I started to think that I can be a benefit and help not only the students inside my classroom, but the students inside a building. So I became an assistant principal, then a principal, and then found every job that I took, I had less of a direct impact, but more of a wider impact on a larger group. So then I did become a director, and then I became a superintendent. And I think the point that really, I think, has helped me has been that each step that I took was more focused on impact than authority. That really wasn't something that was a draw to me. I really wanted to make a difference, and that's why I took each of those steps up into administration. Which leads us to our next point, a common situation that Amy and I have that we went through was a teacher strike in 2016, which started before I got there, but then when we resolved it and when I was there. So I'll turn it over to Amy to talk about the very beginning of that.
Yeah, so this was a very tumultuous time in Westlake. Scott was not our superintendent at that time. The person who was our superintendent, if you were listening to Dr. Chupp at the beginning, the importance of dialogue and understanding the position that each person is coming from with that dialogue, that was not happening at all. We had problems in the district, normal problems that you would have between administration and the employees, and nothing was being resolved. At that time, I had written, I believe, 18 grievances that year, which, if you're not familiar with that term, it means that there has been a violation of the contract, that you are seeking resolution, and things that would happen wouldn't be, okay, let's sit down and discuss this. It would be, well, you broke the timeline, so we're not even going to think about it. And that was the kind of administration that we were dealing with that brought us to this place of strike with the administrator that had been there. And there was no dialogue happening. There was no seeking to understand. It was usually come in, get yelled at, nothing is resolved, and leave. You have to leave also. So when poor Scott came into the district, we were already well down this path. We had had a strike committee. We had been organizing strike activities, having our membership show up at the board meeting, doing all of the things that you think of when you think of strikes. Picketing, we had done informational meetings with the community, and taken a strike, gotten to the point where we had taken a strike vote, and 98% of it had passed. So in the midst of all of this, Dr. Coggin was hired and came in as superintendent. So would you like to?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just hit on, I know our time's tight, but I do want to hit on just 2 points really quick. One was when I actually sat down at the table for the first time with the union's team. And we just did an exercise where and it was funny hearing Dr. Chupp kind of talk about, finding our common ground or finding things that we agree upon, and wrote down the top things that were in disagreement that was preventing any type of resolution. And I was able to look up, and 2 of the things I immediately agreed with. And I said, oh, well, that one there and that one there I agree with. And I just walked off and I crossed them off the list. And then there was just like a moment where people kind of sat back and were like, okay, I think we can get somewhere. And
yeah, that was a huge moment in the whole process. And it was like, oh my gosh, he's actually listening to us. He's hearing what our issues are really, and not just saying no. And we've reached an agreement already. It was a huge move in the right direction.
Yeah, and then afterwards, and if anybody's been through that, through a strike or something like that, when the contract is resolved, things aren't better. I mean, once it's signed, there's still bad feelings. And the way I would describe it is even when I'd walk into a room, I'd feel like to get from the doorway to where the teacher was sitting, there's eggshells all over the room. And then the more we did together and the more we got to know each other, and I'll tell you one of the ways that we've done that, I felt like there were less and less shells on the ground and there was more room to walk. One of the things that we did establish is what we call a communication forum. And we have a session, half-day session every month. And what's nice about it is it's something that it doesn't happen as a big event. It's just something that we constantly do. And we have this practice where we sit down and check our titles at the door. And we take issues that are potentially bubbling within our district, and we put them on the table, and we have open and honest conversation. And one of the things that we really focus on is gaining the other person's perspective, because I can have we can look at the same issue, and I can have my perspective on why administratively that could be a problem, and then the teachers can have their perspective, and you have some of those aha moments where people go, oh, I didn't even think about looking at it like that. But I think the core of being able to do that has been a trust that's been established through the years, through that open dialogue. But those have been things that have really helped us and benefited us. So.
Yeah, being able to communicate open and honestly about what the issues are and seeing, okay, well, the superintendent is looking at it this way, and this is why it's an issue for him. And the teachers are looking at it this way, and this is an issue of why it's an issue for them. And how can we work together to find something that will resolve the issue, at least partially, if not completely, for both parties, has been a huge difference in the way our district works, because we also realize that we're both there for the same thing. We want to educate kids, and we want to do the best for kids that we can. And sometimes we look at that differently, but if we can see each other's perspective, we can usually get to a resolution that will achieve the ultimate goal.
Correct. Should we pause now, Dr. Chupp?
Yes, thank you so much. And what I think you really illustrated is an important point that we want to commend everyone to think about. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing so deeply and so honestly about your process, and how it really dialogue is a major component of that, as I can see. What I think that you illustrate in your stories are that you used dialogue as part of a decision-making process. And I even heard you kind of go through these three areas, that you listened to create some mutual understanding and know where each were coming from. And then that preceded the deliberation about what is it that, what are the alternatives and how do we work at those, and then actually making a decision. So that's a good example of how dialogue is positioned within a larger decision-making process as one important step. So thank you for that. So in dialogue itself, we focus on drawing out people's stories, as you did, to understand why they hold their positions or views. So now we're going to turn to you to engage in a breakout group, the same one you were in before, for a reflective structured dialogue process. Rather than explain it all to you, I think you should just experience it. That's the easiest way to learn it. And so your facilitators are prepared to guide you through this process. I will tell you, it's very regimented with timekeeper and with everyone, so that everyone has a chance to share. And there'll be 3 rounds of dialogue around that. And so that's the process we'll be using. And I'm going to turn it over to JP if he has any further announcements for what he would like to say in terms of getting the group set up into their groups.
Good to go. The breakout rooms will, just like before, send you in there automatically. If anybody is having an issue, I think some people had technical issues last time. There is a button that you can click that's, I think, raise hand or ask for help. If you click that, it'll notify me and I can come in and give you technical assistance. With that Welcome back.
Hi, everyone. Want to give a few minutes, want to thank you for this time together, and excited about the opportunity you had to practice this dialogue. And I hope you found this process helpful, even if it was restrictive and limiting. So imagine using this process on a much more divisive issue, like reproductive rights or other issues that divide our country. The structure allows for more open, free-flowing dialogue as you get past each person's story and what the heart of the matter is for them. And hopefully you had time to do that. Before I make some concluding comments and point towards some resources and where to go in the future, I want to allow some time for question and answer. So we have a few minutes for that. So does anyone have a question or a comment that they would like to make? And I think if you raise your hand or put it in the chat, JP and I can field those. I see Lisa.
I have a question about factual misunderstandings. Like, is there a space in this particular protocol for responding with corrections or questions around factual assumptions?
Yeah, that's a good comment. And what we often will do is allow, and this is the benefit of having multiple sessions, is sometimes there is research or fact finding or educational components that become part of the process to say, that's a question that we need more information on. And then becomes in itself an own sense of dialogue, because then you dialogue around, here's information, because as we know today, different people have different facts and different sets of information. And so that becomes a dialogue of what people choose to listen to and what information they bring forward. So yeah, that more and more that becomes an important part of the process.
Thank you.
April.
So I just want to share my experience, which it was good. We had 3 questions and we each answered it. But what I think I didn't experience was dialogue. It was more like each of us answering the questions. So what I experienced was listening to different views around people's stories around unions. But I'm not there. It feels like there should be something next, and I'm not sure I got something next.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this was the problem with the time limits that we have for today. What would typically happen is more open conversation, and I would encourage those on our facilitators and JP to offer their input on this as well, who've been trained in reflective structured dialogue. One of the things that really is powerful after you've done what you've done so far is to have a conversation where you engage in, what is something that I heard that maybe has made me question my own set of assumptions or about the other or about my own views. And so it becomes a bit more of understanding the complexity of an issue, because often what happens through this process is that people say, oh, I see something in your perspective that I had not noticed before. JP, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and also just that to your earlier point, Mark, that this is a process in a typical reflective structured dialogue process. A facilitator would spend about a month of prep work to gather the specific group of people to make sure all, as Mark mentioned in his talk, like all the preconditions are met. And then you would actually meet on a regular basis over the course of months, or some dialogue groups have even met over the course of years on a regular basis, and unpack slowly. So there's time then for the mutual fact finding, and also you would actually tailor and kind of scale the questions to where the group is at. And so this being an introduction, we started at square one, right? But that you would kind of grow it over time.
So you got a taste of the beginning of that process. I see Richard's hand up, but I see Richard walked away. So I'm not sure if there's
It's Richard's wife.
okay.
Question, I'm Gretchen. I wonder what you do. What is a way to deal with the situation when things break down? Is there a way of moving them back toward some kind of dialogue, or do you just kind of say, we're not ready, we'll talk later?
It's a good question. It depends what the breakdown is, but I would, and I've experienced this in some work I've been doing in the last 6 months, actually, is sometimes new information comes out, which is very devastating and harming to one party. And that is a setback or maybe a stalemate. And actually creating space for that and allowing people to be in that space of stuckness, of great sense of loss is actually an important part of the process. I rarely recommend that groups who have difficult topics to work on or issues between them hold one session, because this invariably happens. We're so used to covering everything up or being superficial that when we actually have this honest conversation, things come up that become very, very difficult, and they have to be addressed and given time. Kathleen, did you want to speak to that?
I did. I think in this practice in some way was cut short because I kept saying to the group, write your questions down. You're going to have cross conversation about the things you want to probe more deeply and the questions you want to ask. And we actually did not get to that in our group time at all. So I think there was a piece of the experience that didn't happen.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. Yeah, yeah. I hope that even if you experience as what Kathleen just described, that you have the anticipation that that would have been a fruitful conversation and not a divisive one, based on the first few rounds you did. Scott?
Yes, the question that's rumbling around in my head is, I see the definite value in this, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of the challenges of the limited time of something like this, to lay out a process that obviously, you've been teaching and those facilitating have been learning for an extended period of time. But I wonder if there can't be, there are not always going to be situations where you can set up do all the background work and have a month ahead of time to prep the participants and do all that legwork, that this kind of an approach can be utilized in conversations with, in my case, as you well know from our personal conversations, with family members and whatnot, that you can't have better conversations or better dialogue that doesn't become divisive right off the bat in individual situations, that can move it from being just, we won't even go there and ignore the situation, to at least having some form of interaction.
Yeah, and I'm gonna speak to that when I talk about next steps. But dialogue is a process we can use in any setting. We can use it in a meeting at work. We can use it in our congregations. And the design of that process depends on the level of conflict and division, and the amount of time that the issue warrants. And so there are other processes I'll speak to in a little bit that address some of that. But yeah, it's a very good point. Raj, I see your hand.
Yeah, one important takeaway, I think, even in the limited amount of time we have, was the importance of listening with the intention of learning about, not just hearing, but really listening with the intention of learning about where the other person's coming from, because in our breakout room, there were a lot of personal stories that were very
that's it.
And I think that's important to learn the other person's point of view and realize that they're coming in with their personal history.
Yeah.
I was just going to say how helpful I found it to have writing time embedded into the process today. I would normally blow off writing during writing time, but I really found it helpful today and appreciated that being built into the experience, which I think helps de-escalate you a little bit when you're talking about something riling up, to put some pen to paper and then to choose your words more carefully. So I don't know if that's normally a part of the process, but I definitely appreciated it today.
Very much a part of the process. Yeah. So let me say a few concluding comments, and then I want to give some examples of different ways of using dialogue. Dialogue is powerful. It affects our intellect, what we think and what we know. It affects our emotions and our ability to empathize with others. And it even affects our spirit, or our caring, our soul, and our sense of nurturing and caring for others and for ourselves. When dialogue works, we understand ourselves better. Our values are clarified. We gain perspective of ourselves, and then in turn, we gain perspectives of the other. As I've said, dialogue can take many forms, from a one-time session to a sustained process. Just a comment about what I was just saying. In the field of conflict transformation, we often say the length of a time conflict takes to develop is a sign of how long it takes to transform it. I would say that the format of dialogue should also be informed by the length of the time the issue has been divisive and has escalated. So if something has been brooding for 2 years, it's very difficult to imagine a 1 hour or a 2 hour session resolving those issues and bringing people to mutual understanding. So what are other processes that include dialogue that can help heal us as a society? So one, Scott referenced a little bit, is I would just say the whole process of study groups and other educational processes. At Forest Hill Church, our racial inclusion committee and the Black Caucus has held many book studies over the last number of years around race and racial equity and inclusion and systemic racism. And it's been a really incredible process to see people, through the process of looking at an external resource like a book, come together and have gained greater understanding of one another. There's a whole field of work around circle processes, which are essentially a dialogue process as well. And I'm using a circle process now with this is not a local example, but a nonprofit, a very successful nonprofit whose 40-year-old founder was just terminated, and it created a tremendous amount of harm and around grievances that were filed about the founder's behavior. And they're using a circle process to try to mend their relations and that have taken place as a result of that. Isam, who introduced me, is active in organizing Tea Times for Peace here locally, which is part of a national organization. I'll put that link in the chat. And that's an amazing experience of bringing people together, interfaith kind of conversations, as it implies, around having tea together and table conversations. Sustained dialogue is a process that is also well established, and we are using this process at our own university. And so I will share with you an example of this. This is the sustained dialogue process. Reflective structured dialogue is very regulated in terms of the actual conversations. Sustained dialogue is also a thorough process, and it requires at least 5 sessions because you go through the who, what, why, how, and now, which is action. And we are using that in our own faculty at Mandel School here at Case to work on faculty and staff climate and how we We have values as social workers that may not be consistent with the traditional hierarchical way in which we do things. Another example is a process that Gwen Garth, who I think is on the call here today, and I have developed, and it's a process that we call community building across divides. And it really begins with, as Brian Stevens talks about, getting proximate and listening to each other. So through that process of learning each other's stories, we begin to acknowledge, and this is especially true in issues of racial injustice and division, acknowledging the injustices and inequity that separates us as a part of beginning a healing process, and then really kind of reassessing where we're at in terms of community assets, sharing power, and then transforming our institutions so that the relations that we've established can be sustained and maintained. And then on an ongoing basis, really focusing on the power of love to overcome hate. And so this is a whole organizational transformation process that we think is important to do. And we've been trying to foster that between the university and the surrounding neighborhoods. And Gwen is a partner in that process as an activist and Cleveland artist. And then finally, I'll say that there are many public decision-making models, like we saw with the Westlake schools, where dialogue is a part of that process. And so that becomes an important part of this as well. And there's many examples, some done effectively and some not so effectively, where dialogue precedes public decision-making. Often the dialogue is missing. I will say that as a caveat. So why does dialogue work? Meg Wheatley says, "We do not fear the person whose story we know." Dialogue creates a space for learning each other's story. And once the fear of judgment and rejection are gone, we can begin to better understand where each is coming from. As I've talked about before, our deepest fears melt away as we begin to see where this person is coming from and what is driving them. So where do we go from here? I encourage you to read the article that was sent out ahead of time by Julie Schumacher-Cohen. She states, when you study what actually transforms people, it's almost never the experience of being shouted down or shut out, but rather human connections. So we need to come together to understand each other, not to minimize our differences. We are divided because we hold different values that we use to justify ourselves and judge the others. But if we can see that we're all in this together, it will make a difference. Heather McGee and her book, The Sum of Us, found in her extensive research that white people lost as much, if not more, from racism. And progress for one must not come at the expense of others. And when people come together across race, we can actually accomplish what people can't do on their own as separate groups. And so we all have ways to benefit from this. The power of dialogue is that people explore what matters most to them, learn to value the other, and together to seek a way to coexist. What emerges are different core values that are essential to each person, and yet people move toward each other to mutual respect. So there's some key elements to that. Invite people to share their personal experiences. Slow down for people to connect, listen, and as Lisa said, kind of de-escalate their own reactions and to acknowledge each other. I think it's probably not useful to debate over facts or politics or political ideologies. Another tip is to get curious. Ask each other this question that you were asked today. What's the heart of the matter for you? What are your biggest fears? What are your hopes? And of course, using facilitators to help listen and draw out differences for others so that it also has a calming effect. So we will be sending out a number of resources, and I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth to close us out. There'll be books and articles, national and local organizations doing this work. And the goal is really to promote what John Powell calls belongingness, where people do not simply tolerate and respect differences, but actually ensure that all people are welcome and feel that they belong in our society. I have a friend who is an Israeli Jew who does this work among settlement communities. and communities that she would say are not helping the peace process. But she believes it's important to engage everyone in the process of becoming better at communicating and being in dialogue. So even sort of crossing over to the other side and equipping people how to use these skills is part of that. By engaging those who have different worldviews and hopes, the hope is that everyone will go away with a greater commitment to each other and to work toward the greater good. Only with the acceptance of the other will my relationship turn from judging to mutuality, as I begin to see this person as a gift and not a problem to solve.
Sent in the chat a survey that we invite you to respond to. You will receive soon an email from us that will include, again, the survey, Professor Chupp's list of books and resources, and the meeting of our planning group. The next meeting will be Tuesday, March 29th, 5:30, and anyone is welcome to that. The seminar books that we mentioned will be at the Rocky River United Methodist Church Library. Today's recording will be posted later. Everyone is welcome to the next seminar in 2023, hopefully in person, and anytime at Rocky River United Methodist Church, you are welcome. If the meeting now formally closes, but everybody is welcome to stay on the Zoom for informal conversation and maybe get further with some of those discussions that we had to interrupt due to the time limits for the official meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming and participating.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and
official
Rocky
leaders,
River
everyone.
United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.